Hi, folks. Welcome. You have joined us in this afternoon's breakout session. This is Multiple Pathways Through Learning and Into Work, Innovations in Youth Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. My name is Taylor White. I am the National Director of the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship at New America, and you'll be hearing more from me and my colleague Joyce Huang later. But to kick us off this afternoon, we have Martha Ross from the Brookings Institution, joining us, who's going to talk a little bit about some research she and colleagues have led over the last couple of months to understand the work-based learning ecosystem and help us understand it along with them. Before we kick off, I will confess to you that I am also admitting folks to the room as I'm trying to talk to you. So while we just let folks settle in, if you wouldn't mind dropping into the chat just a note about who you are and where you're joining us from. Are you from a K-12 district? Are you a higher education professional? Do you work in policy or advocacy or research? We are curious to get a sense of who's joining us this afternoon and to make sure that as we walk through our remarks throughout our time together this afternoon that we are aware of what it is you might be listening for. So we'll give folks just about 30 more seconds to settle in before I kick it over to Martha. And in the meantime, please let us know in the chat who we've got here. Of course, now I'm looking for my chat box. What did I do with it? You'd think after all these months, we'd all be very good at this, but there it is. Hello, Carolyn, Andy, Michael, very nice to meet you all. Thank you for joining us. If others are signing on right now, we're just taking a moment for folks to let us know who's here in the chat box. And it looks like we've got a number of folks who work in K-12 education, no surprise, and a couple of high school folks, folks from different innovation projects, learning initiatives, et cetera. It's great to see. So we'll get started in just 1 second. And let me admit the last couple folks here through Zoom. All right, great. Well, thank you so much to folks who are introducing themselves in the chat. We appreciate it. What we will be doing here today, just a quick overview. I'm going to momentarily hand it over to Martha Ross from the Brookings Institution to talk through some research she's been leading on work-based learning. My colleague Joyce and I will follow up after Martha to talk a little bit about youth apprenticeship and an initiative that we've been leading through New America called the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. And then we'll reserve some time at the end for discussion and questions from all of you. And I think, as I'm seeing, we're getting just a couple more people coming into the waiting room. I will hand it over to Martha now so that she can get started, and I will turn my camera off while I continue to admit folks and figure out all the things we need to know with Zoom. So Martha, I'll let you take it away. Just a reminder, I have the slides, so if you want me to advance, I can do that. Just let me know.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Martha Ross. I'm with the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program in Washington, D.C. The Metro program is one of the 5 major programs, research programs at Brookings, and we focus on how to help cities and regions become more economically competitive and socially inclusive. And as part of that, I focus on the labor market. We have a paper coming out in November, so you are getting a sneak peek. And it is focused on how we can use high quality work-based learning as a lever to advance equity and economic opportunity for young people. With such an education-focused crowd, I know that there are a lot of you who have some knowledge of work-based learning and some may have less. So I'm going to try to speak in a way that resonates with all of you. But, you know, compared to other countries, we do not provide that much structure and support to people, to young people as they move from school to work and financial independence. There's a fuzzy interface between school and work, and once you are done with, once you finish or graduate from high school, the message has pretty much gotten through that college is the best ticket to the middle class, but it's not equally accessible or understandable for everyone. So a lot of people are looking at either a low wage labor market or post-secondary landscape that is confusing and looks financially out of reach and is hard to navigate. So what we wanted to do was think of a better school to work transition that had stronger guardrails to keep young people on track and stronger safety nets to catch them. And that takes proactive steps to ensure that especially young people of color and from low income backgrounds are prepared for success. This work that's coming out now is a follow-up to a piece we did in 2018 with the group Child Trends, where we looked at 30-year-olds who had come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds as teens. And we found that participating in some forms of work-based learning, like an internship or an apprenticeship, was associated with a higher quality job at age 30. And it was not a huge difference, but for an educational activity in high school to have an effect in employment more than a decade later was notable. And we thought that it might be the relationships inherent in well-designed internships and apprenticeships that was part of, that drove that finding. So Taylor, can you advance to the next slide? So the first question is, what is work-based learning? Let's get our definitions straight. There actually are a lot of definitions of work-based learning. It generally involves some form of exposure to workers and the workplace to introduce young people to the world of work, and it's carried out in conjunction with some form of an educational or training program. And its rationale is simple, that the best way to teach young people about work is to expose them to actual workers and job-related tasks in workplaces. And that to be career ready, young people have to actively engage with the work context and different environments and people and responsibilities. So there's a continuum from a fairly low exposure activities, such as attending a career fair or having a guest speaker in a class, to more intensive activities that involve extensive employer involvement and provide training, both general work skills and in occupationally specific skills. And it's that latter side that I am more focused on, that more intensive side. When we were surveying definitions, I liked this one from the National Governors Association for being fairly practical and comprehensive, continuum of programs that provide young people educational experiences to help them advance along a career pathway, and that there's a clear agreement between the participant and an employer. There's an authentic work experience. That sounds obvious, but it is important to emphasize that there has to be actual work. It is not make work. And that is harder than it sounds to organize. You have to be intentional about it. As you all may know, work-based learning is getting more popular again. It is coming back from, I think, an association with a lower quality form of vocational education. And instead, we're seeing that a lot of people are rejecting as a false dichotomy that you either learn academic excellence or you prepare for careers, and instead you can integrate them. And we're going to hear more about that from when we learn about the Youth Apprenticeship Initiative. But I should say that work-based learning still in the whole landscape of K through 12 education is still fairly uneven in its availability and in its quality. And even with recent expansions, it's still a fairly niche role. And it, the pendulum may swing and the popularity may fade. I should note also that it's not limited only to the K through 12 system. There are programs, very good programs as well, for young people who are out of school, who have either left high school or graduated from high school, but are not in a degree granting program. I saw some people from Youth Build in the chat, so I wanted to acknowledge that. And unless we really increase our commitment to high quality work-based learning, it's still going to reach a relatively small number of people. Relatively few programs are going to be designed and staffed to have best practices, and probably even fewer will have the resources to focus on quality improvement and evaluation. So the next slide. In support of a more equitable and high quality vision of work-based learning, we synthesized research and practice from several fields, from education, from youth development and human development, and workforce development. And we highlighted 3 key concepts that underlie quality work-based learning. And none of them should be surprising. I'm sorry, my second grader, I think, is unhappy with his assignment. Positive relationships with adults, either the supervisor or the teacher or both, who prepares and places you in a work-based learning setting. Social capital that helps you connect with other opportunities and contacts that you may not get without knowing, sort of who you know is what matters. And then, as I mentioned before, authentic work experiences. Next slide. The relationships and social capital, I would say, are obviously important in education and in workforce development and youth development, but they are not usually prioritized in terms of what we fund and how we design programs and how we measure quality. Even though, as we know, relationships with adults are one of the most important measures of quality in a youth serving program. Per almost everyone that you talk to, as well as a really authoritative review of the literature from the National Academy of Sciences. And relationships don't have to be, they don't have to be particularly emotionally intense. Relationships come in all sorts of flavors, in levels of intensity, in duration. But the important thing is that in this relationship between a young person and an adult, the young person has a chance to learn more about who they are, check out their abilities, see possibilities for their future, and think about how to contribute and engage with the world around them. Search Institute, based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, has done some of the most thorough work on this front, and they outline 5 key attributes of these so-called developmental relationships. And the most familiar one to most people would be, I would think, expressing care, but they outline these other elements as well. And if you go to the next slide, you can see how in a workplace setting, it is not a stretch at all to develop these, to use these different components of developmental relationships. So express care, get to know someone, how was their weekend, how are their classes, ask follow-up questions, that's expressing care, set high expectations for performance, not unrealistic expectations, but high expectations. That's a challenge leading to growth. Offer support, help them reach those high expectations, provide feedback, help them figure out how to solve a problem, or present a problem, get their feedback. That's sharing power. And then asking them about their interests and introducing them to new ideas and people. That's expanding possibilities. And that last one is where social capital comes in most explicitly. One moment, please. Sophie. That was my 5th grader. Next slide. So in order to support relationships and social capital, we need to do a couple things. And these two concepts are intertwined. It is through relationships that you access the resources and contacts inherent in social capital. So what we need to do is make sure, thank you, Greg Brown, I appreciate your comment. What we need to do is design programs intentionally so that young people have regular opportunities to interact with adults, and then also provide them opportunities to learn the skills and behaviors to help them build relationships with others, both so that they are in a position to take advantage of new information and new contacts. And this all needs to be quite explicit and intentional and reflected in job descriptions, in staff training, in performance measurement, and how staff is how staff can use their time. What we are hoping is that with a more expansive version of work-based learning that incorporates these elements, that we can form a more robust pathway into the labor market and provide everyone with a more equal footing to prepare them for success. And with that being said, I will pass it back to Taylor, who can tell us about a particular example of this kind of effort with youth apprenticeships.
Great. Thank you, Martha, for that overview. I'm very much looking forward to the release of your paper. I am also looking forward to momentarily starting my video. There it is. And saying hello to everybody. So thank you, Martha, for the transition and for sharing that with us. I think let's see, doing lots of things here. There we go. That's me. So at any rate, Martha's given us a really great and helpful overview of work-based learning and the many definitions that exist, but most importantly, I think some of the indicators of quality work-based learning that we look for when understanding what these programs are and really evaluating their efficacy for young learners. I introduced myself at the top of the hour, but we've had a number of folks join us over the first several minutes here. So I'll just introduce myself very briefly. Again, my name is Taylor White. I work for New America, and we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think and action tank based in Washington, D.C. At New America, I serve as the National Director for our Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, which is an initiative that I and my colleague Joyce will tell you a little bit about in the moments ahead together today. I also serve as a senior advisor there for K-12 education and workforce, and so spend most of my time really focused on this sort of high school to post-secondary transition with a sprinkling of the career side of the career college and readiness equation in the mix as well. That may resonate with some of you who I see in the chat are here from a number of different organizations, from school districts and organizations that support work-based learning in various capacities. So welcome. I am here to talk to you a little bit today about youth apprenticeship. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of youth apprenticeship, and Martha's overview of work-based learning has certainly touched on several of the core components of youth apprenticeship. At New America and within PAYA, which is the partnership I mentioned minutes ago, we think about youth apprenticeship really as kind of a gold standard within the work-based learning spectrum. In the United States, youth apprenticeship is really a fragmented field. There have been state systems and local programs in place in corners of our country for several decades, but we do not as a country have a national system of youth apprenticeship like the Germans or the Swiss, the Austrians or several other countries around the world. I know we have some folks on the line from Canada and from Singapore, and it looks like India as well. And those are countries, particularly Singapore and Canada, that have various degrees of systems around youth apprenticeship and work-based learning as well. So perhaps later today in the chat or elsewhere, we'll learn from some of their work. We do not in the United States have a federal definition of youth apprenticeship. We have about 20 different state definitions, some of which are very, very specific and lay out minimum numbers of hours that students must be completing on-the-job learning or things like that. Others are very loosey-goosey and really just sort of establish the term as something in state statute or state code. So it really runs the gamut. We have decided to issue a national definition for youth apprenticeship because we feel organizationally that it's important for this field to have a clear sense of what it is they are and should be doing and what quality looks like. And my colleague Joyce will talk a little bit more about why we think we have a role to play in this space later on. But just to get us started, the slide that you see in front of you here, what is youth apprenticeship, outlines our belief or sort of our sense that youth apprenticeship, much like adult apprenticeship, really has 4 core elements. Students that complete youth apprenticeship have an opportunity for paid on-the-job learning under the supervision of a mentor in the workplace. That's important not only so that students have an opportunity to develop those mentorship and adult relationships, those social networks that Martha referenced a few minutes ago, but also the paid piece is hugely important for equity. Unpaid internships, in my view, and I think I speak for all of my colleagues on the line, they can be really truly exploitative for young people, and particularly when they're unpaid. They're really only accessible to students who can afford to spend time working and not getting paid for their time. Youth apprenticeship also includes assessment of students' skills against very clear and transparent skill and competency standards. And that's in particular, those standards are used to evaluate students' learning on the job. At the same time they're learning on the job and being assessed for that component of their time, they're also completing related classroom-based instruction. And that instruction paired with the on-the-job learning culminates in some sort of portable, industry-recognized credential. And we feel at New America very strongly that youth apprenticeship should also culminate in post-secondary credit. Doing so allows students to jumpstart their post-secondary lives. It can provide low to no cost head start towards degrees. And we really do feel that it's important that youth apprenticeship be positioned as one route to a post-secondary credential or degree, not an alternative to it. So again, just in sum, youth apprenticeship is designed to be a structured work-based learning opportunity for students. They typically start when students are in high school age, though not necessarily enrolled in high school. There's several great programs that target opportunity and out-of-school youth as well. And they include these 4 core elements. Why do we think that youth apprenticeship is sort of a gold standard in this space? We see youth apprenticeship, particularly in this moment in our economic context, as a really effective near-term solution that has long-term benefits, both for young people and the businesses that are involved in the programs. And I'll also say that because these programs rely on the very close partnership and interaction of secondary, post-secondary systems, the workforce system, and local employers, they have an added benefit of really helping those institutions break out of their silos and work more closely together in ways that, based on the work we've done so far, seem to really deliver results and a lot of sort of resilience building for communities as well. So just briefly, I'll walk through here the benefits of youth apprenticeship for employers. We often get asked why employers would get involved in something like this. Why would they hire apprentices who are 16, 17, 18 years old and pay them a wage? It's an opportunity for employers to try talent before they buy. And I realize that sounds a little bit crude, but it is really a long on-ramp for employers to get to know potential future employees, and they're paying them while they're doing that, unlike unpaid internships, which many of us may have completed. And I'll just apologize quickly if you see me pivoting my head. I'm still admitting people to our session, so it keeps popping up over here. So I'm sorry about that. So again, flexibility for employers. It's an opportunity for them to get to know entry-level talent and train them along the way before they hire them on in a 40-hour-a-week role, for example. It's an opportunity for employers to tap into new sources of talent. We know that Gen Z, who are the current high school age students, are a more diverse generation than the millennials. They also have less job experience on average, less real world work experience than any previous generation before them. And so youth apprenticeship is an important opportunity for the employers today to be giving important work experience to those who will fill the job opportunities of tomorrow. And finally, the idea that students or that employers are doing this as sort of a corporate social responsibility effort is incorrect. Often we hear that about work-based learning. Oh, employers really just don't have anything to give here. Youth apprenticeship is unique in that they are giving and taking, in the sense that they're investing in these programs. It is a big ask, but the return on investment for these longer and more sustained programs from employers is also higher. There are studies that show that that apprentices become productive, in X number of months since starting, and that employers are able to recoup their investment quite quickly, and more quickly than many would guess. We also see non-qualitative benefits to employers too in surveys. They love having young talent, young energy. It's a really interesting and important opportunity for mid-level managers to develop more experience in those managerial roles. And there's a host of other benefits as well. I am not going to walk through all of the bullets on the apprentice side of the equation here. I'll just emphasize that a key component of the benefit here is that it provides really important structure and direction for young people. It's an opportunity for them to earn a wage while they're learning on the job, developing those important social networks, and also earning a wage, right? And for many of our young people, and now more than ever, the opportunity to earn a wage and to be developing valuable transferable skills while doing so is hugely important. Many of the benefits of youth apprenticeship are the benefits that Martha walked through, so I'm not going to beat them to death with you here, but happy to answer more questions about this later on as necessary. How does youth apprenticeship work? There are many different ways to eat a Reese's, as they say, and the same is true with youth apprenticeship. The model that you see here on the screen is just a sample 3-year model. Hopefully you're able to see, some of the tiny text, but I'll walk through it really quickly. This is a 3-year model that starts when a student is in high school, and that's the kind of, you see year 1 on the kind of upper left-hand side of this graphic. Typically, a student starts a youth apprenticeship program during their junior or senior year in high school. And in this model, we have a hypothetical high school junior who starts. They are about 3/4 of their time in class, and they're taking high school classes, potentially high school CTE coursework. They are also taking college courses, and that may be through dual enrollment or concurrent enrollment. Many of you are here at Aurora, have an interest in competency-based education. I will say that in states that have flexibility of credit requirements, both in terms of how credits are defined and provide some level of flexibility for districts to define their own graduation requirements, we do find that these pathways are easier to build and navigate. So in year 1, 3/4 of the time, hypothetically, in coursework, that coursework is directly aligned to paid on-the-job learning that students begin in that first year, and they're paid employees from the get-go. In year 2, as you can see, that equation changes just a little bit. Students are in high school classes about half the time, and they're spending more time on the job site earning wages, developing skills, and hopefully earning credits for their time as well, earning course credit. Apprentices graduate at the end of year 2, and in year 3, you can see the balance of that, that pie chart has flipped. Now they're spending about 3/4 of their time in paid on-the-job learning and about 1/4 of their time in college coursework, completing credits, completing credentials, and moving forward and moving towards an industry credential or a degree. At the end of the program, students have transferable college credit and an industry recognized credential. They've earned their high school diploma. They have developed professional network and mentors, and they have multiple years of paid work experience, which together has the benefit of multiplying the options that exist for them at the conclusion of their program rather than narrowing it. I see a question in the chat here about how can we involve students who aren't clear about their passions or industrial interests. There are a lot of ways we could answer that question, but it did for me just raise one quick point I wanted to make, which is about the industries in particular. And I know, I suspect, Brian, when you said industrial interests, you don't mean, you actually are not asking the question that I'm about to answer. So I do promise we'll come back to your question. But I want to emphasize one thing that we see in the work that we do is that most of the development of youth apprenticeship programs around the country, where we're seeing it grow is not in the industries where you might expect. The building and construction trades, for example, where apprenticeship has a long history, a long rich history here domestically. Instead, we see youth apprenticeship programs emerging in high growth and really high wage industries in a number of regions across the country: healthcare, IT, advanced manufacturing, education. We see some interesting programs emerging to train K through 12 and early career educators, early childhood educators rather. And business operations in finance and insurance are also industries that interestingly have expressed an interest in youth apprenticeship, and we see programs emerging around the country in those fields. So Brian, I will address your question. I realize you were not actually asking us about the industries, but it jogged that in my mind, and I wanted to make that clear before we get too far in here. That's not to say that youth apprenticeship cannot be applied in fields like building and construction trades. We know it's alive and well, and there's a lot of interest to recruit youth into those fields as well. But important to point out that a lot of the growth over the last several years has been in these so-called non-traditional industries. My last slide here is really just to explain to folks how this works, how it happens. Typically, youth apprenticeship is the result of a very carefully coordinated partnership between K-12 and high school, K-12 sector or individual high schools, industries and employers, post-secondary institutions, and some entity. It may be one of these three entities, or it could be an external nonprofit organization, a workforce board, or really any number of different types of organizations serving as an intermediary. In this kind of triangle, high schools design and deliver the CTE or other academic coursework. They provide supports and really help guide students into and through the programs. Industry and employers play an important role identifying the skills that are important in the occupations that they need and working with the education partners to design the academic coursework and also to build training plans for that on-the-job learning. Colleges and universities design and deliver a lot of the instruction. In apprenticeship world, we call it related technical instruction. They assess learning, they grant credit, they issue credentials, and they work very closely with the K-12 system to try to develop smooth pathways, transitions from high school CTE into post-secondary CTE, and in some cases forge articulation agreements that actually grant credit for students' high school CTE. And finally, these intermediary organizations in the middle play, as I said, a hugely important role in coordinating the activity across all of these partners, ensuring that these programs have very clear goals for access, clear goals for outcomes, clear goals for equity, clear accountability programs in place too, to be assessing data and continuously reflecting on it and improving over time. They play a number of roles. I won't go into all of them. I want to cut myself off and hand things over to Joyce to walk through a little bit of the work that we've been leading around youth apprenticeship. So I will kick it over to Joyce, mute myself, turn my camera off again so I can let some folks into the room and address questions. But I'll hand it over to Joyce and I will be happy to answer some questions after the fact. Joyce, amazingly, I think I did it in just 11 minutes. It's a new record for me. So off to you.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, everyone, for folks who are joining us. Or just joining us. You are joining us right at the perfect time to hear about our work at New America with the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship Initiative. We can move on to the next slide. And just to give you a quick overview, we at PAYA are a multi-year initiative to support states and cities in their efforts to expand high-quality apprenticeship opportunities for high school age youth. And one thing we didn't mention yet is this emphasis on high-quality apprenticeship opportunities. And I dropped earlier in the chat a link to a 4-page doc that outlines some of these high quality principles that we really value. And you can read more about that in that document, since we will not get to dive too deeply into that during this session. Next slide. The initiative here at New America with PAYA, we have 3 main objectives. Since youth apprenticeship is still a growing field and area of interest, one of our main objectives is to improve public understanding of what high quality youth apprenticeship programs are. We recognize that it's still a new idea for many folks, and our goal is to raise awareness and get information out there. Second, we also want to service and disseminate information about the conditions and strategies that support youth apprenticeship and help make it work, whether it be policy or other educational or workforce structures that need to be in place for it to grow. And then finally, we support high quality and scalable youth apprenticeship partnerships that better serve communities. And in a second, I'll talk a little bit more about some really direct ways we get to support communities who are doing that work on the ground. Next slide. We wanted to highlight quickly before we talk a little bit more about our work. We wanted to show you this list of funders who are now part of our PAYA Funder Collaborative. And you can see we have a range of philanthropic and corporate funding partners, but I think the variety and number of funders who have committed to supporting this initiative really speak to the momentum and growing interests that philanthropists especially have in youth apprenticeship, and even the many business partners that you see on this slide. So we wanted to thank them and also show you this list. And then next slide, please. We work not only with those many funder partners, but also a group of national partners who we consider our equal and co-collaborators in making this initiative work. You'll recognize many of these organizations who are on this list, such as the National Governors Association, Advance ETE, and JFF. But we also include in the partnership 2 practitioner partners who can really provide and be the voice for organizations who are actually running programs and doing the work. And those 2 partners are Careerize Colorado and Charleston Regional Youth Apprenticeships, which is based at Trident Technical College. Next slide. So we will give you a brief overview of some of the main activities that PAYA takes on, especially in close partnership with the partners we just listed above. And you can go to the next slide, please, Taylor. Thank you. The first main activity or priority that we have is capacity building. So with the national partners that you just saw listed in the previous slide, one of our main goals is to share information with this ever-growing field. So we, along with those partners that were listed, really work to develop research tools and expertise to support the implementation and understanding of youth apprenticeship broadly. And you can see on the slide some examples of publications that we or our partners have released recently related to youth apprenticeship, and they include topics such as the role of data in growing youth apprenticeship, the role of intermediary organizations in making youth apprenticeships work, as well as a toolkit around incorporating equity in youth apprenticeship programs. Next slide. And while we do much of that public facing and research work, we also are focused on providing specific and targeted assistance to 2 main audiences. The first is through our cohort of 9 youth apprenticeship partnerships across the country. And these are 9 programs that we identified through a very competitive grit competition that we opened early last year in 2019. Of the more than 220 applications that we received, we selected these 9 promising, emerging and growing youth apprenticeship partnerships that represent a good diversity of geographic scopes, regions, industries, and organizations. And you can see on this slide that many of these include partnerships from all across the country, but they also represent partnerships who are led by community-based organizations, school districts, and also community college systems. And these are 9 partnerships that we directly fund. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that while we support those 9 financially, we also support a wider PAYA network. And these members were identified through the grant competition and represented a group of programs who might not have been selected for funding, but we really found their work and plans for youth apprenticeship promising. So we wanted to stay engaged with them and also continue to support their youth apprenticeship efforts in other ways. So we have this collaborative across the country that we support through webinars on youth apprenticeship topics, office hours on youth apprenticeship registration, and we also host work groups, which have kicked off this year and are about to kick off for a second round. And many of those work groups meet bi-monthly or sometimes monthly on topics such as data in youth apprenticeship, equity in youth apprenticeship, and then building education pathways using youth apprenticeship as a strategy. And Taylor has just dropped into the chat a link where you can learn more about who these network members are and where they are located. And much like many of you in the room, they represent a wide range of organizations and partnerships. And I saw that we had someone from New Hampshire. New Hampshire is also part of our network with the community college system. And I believe I also saw someone in the chat from another city, which is represented in our network, but now I can't remember where it was. Anyways, thank you, Taylor, for moving to the next slide. And before we talk a little bit more about PAYA's future work, we wanted to give you a quick snapshot into some of our grantees and give you a deeper dive into the work they're doing. So very briefly, one grantee that we wanted to highlight for you today is ApprenticeshipNC, or Apprenticeship North Carolina. They are a statewide program in North Carolina that is led by the state's community college system. And through the grant, ApprenticeshipNC is working to build upon an existing youth apprenticeship infrastructure in the state. So North Carolina actually has had youth apprenticeship programs in place for several years now, mostly in advanced manufacturing programs for high school students, but they're now working to expand those programs to other sectors and industries outside of manufacturing, such as financial technology, as well as into other regions in the state that previously might not have hosted programs before. And it has typically been a 3 to 4 year program in which students split their time learning on the job, as well as taking courses at their local community college. And what makes North Carolina unique in particular is that students who take these courses at the community college actually benefit from a tuition waiver if they start their program within 120 days of graduating from high school. And we also wanted to mention that North Carolina is currently working to align these developing youth apprenticeship programs and pathways with existing CTE curriculum pathways that already exist at the K-12 level. So you can see here how North Carolina has really incorporated youth apprenticeship as a part of their broader work-based learning system and strategy. And one unique component of North Carolina's strategy in particular is that they are working to function almost as their own PAYA in a sense. They are hoping to be the central entity in a broader North Carolina youth apprenticeship network where they can be in contact with regional programs and collaboratives across the state and provide technical assistance and resources similar to the way we do for programs across the country. Next slide, please. Another program we wanted to highlight for you today is led by an organization called Early Care and Education Pathways to Success, also known as ESEPS. They are a sector mediary out in California that is working to build youth apprenticeship programs in the fields of early care and education, as well as the social and human services area, which is something that is newer to youth apprenticeship and is certainly not what many people think of when they think about youth apprenticeship or CTE, but they have been working to develop a a strong youth apprenticeship model in Oakland. And what makes this program unique is that they really rely on the leadership of community colleges out in California, in particular Berkeley City College, which has really begun to take charge of the growing program out in the Bay Area. And their model is a 2-year model in which students will take the first year to learn more and be exposed to the field of both education and early care, as well as human services. And then in the second year of the program, they will pick a specialization and take courses in that field in particular, while also getting some on-the-job training, either at a local school or even some public sector opportunities. What is also cool about this program is that in addition to the credentials that they would receive in their field of study, they will also earn college credits that they can then transfer to many of the public 2 or 4 year institutions in the state of California. And they're also working to develop this program or this model in the Antelope Valley region, as well as the San Joaquin region, with the community colleges in those areas. And they're also hoping to really hone in on a set of policy priorities that they can advance in the state of California with legislators and all their other administrators in the state to make youth apprenticeship work, not only for youth apprenticeships in this sector, but also broadly in the state of California. Next slide. And finally, we wanted to highlight this youth apprenticeship program, which is led by Jefferson County Public Schools out in Louisville. They are really working on using youth apprenticeship as another component to their strong work-based learning system through the Academies of Louisville, which is a career academy school model that offers opportunities for career exploration for high school students through field trips, job shadowing, internships, and co-ops. But they're currently working to expand that to youth apprenticeship, which would provide a really in-depth work-based learning opportunity and also allow them to access post-secondary credits while they are in high school. And they will be able to leverage the many business partnerships that they've already established in the region, given their strong work-based learning infrastructure that they already have. And they're hoping to build out youth apprenticeship opportunities in sectors such as advanced manufacturing, construction, education, finance, healthcare, IT, as well as media, arts, and communication. And they'll gather a regional advisory committee in the region to help advance this youth apprenticeship priority in the area, and that includes a lot of business voices. That will include voices from the post-secondary institutions in the area, such as the Technical Community College, and representatives from the mayor's office to make all this happen. And that is a quick snapshot of some of the grantees we have, and I will turn it back over to Taylor to talk to you a little bit more about what is next for PAYA.
Great, thank you, Joyce. I am going to jump over this slide, jump right to this slide, and move us into questions in about 30 seconds. But what I just wanted to say in closing, Joyce profiled 3 of the sites that we support with grant funding and technical assistance to help them launch these programs and really connect them into systemic initiatives focused on work-based learning and post-secondary achievement. And we'll continue this initiative. We just launched another 2-year phase of the work 2 weeks ago, I guess. Still surviving, still like recovering from that. Many of the orange circles that you can see on the screen right now are up there really just because we understand that these are priorities for folks who are advancing a number of initiatives in K-12 and higher education at the moment. And I really just stick them up here to let you know these are things that we are thinking about. If you are thinking about them, it would be great to be connected and learn what you are learning and share what we've learned too, particularly around things like intermediaries, engaging student voice in the planning process, and really the sort of governance process of programs like this. how we can be advancing design and policy frameworks that have equity at the center, and how we can continue advancing our ability to collect and analyze data and get that data into the hands of practitioners so they can be making data-informed decisions as well. I got the 10-minute alert, so I am going to put up the questions and reactions slide here, and I will momentarily stop sharing my screen. But we would love to answer questions from the audience. We have a number of questions that have come into the chat. I'll do my very best to ask some of those and give both Martha and Joyce a chance to answer them. But let's see, we had one a second ago that I focused on here. How do programs integrate with the everyday school curriculum? Do we have to worry about sacrificing academic school time for the apprenticeship? We're happy to answer this on the apprenticeship side, but what I might do is actually ask Martha to say a word about how you would answer that question if it wasn't specific to apprenticeship, if it was just talking about work-based learning and how different types of work-based learning might plug into existing curriculum or occupy sort of different amounts of students' time. And then Joyce or I can answer on the apprenticeship side of things.
Sure, thank you. I think it is often a challenge, and what I have observed is that a lot of the logistical stuff is handled school by school or district by district, and unfortunately, there's no easy answer because a lot of work-based learning is not generally prioritized as one of the graduation requirements, and it can be crowded out. It takes a lot of negotiation and savvy from what I have seen about understanding the local graduation requirements and what is flexible and what you can trade off. It's not very satisfying, I'm sorry to say.
Joyce, do you want to give an answer to that question on the youth apprenticeship side of things? Thank you for that, Martha. I don't know that our answer is totally different, although we might be able to give a couple more specific examples just based on sites that we've been supporting. Joyce, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Okay. I think I'm unmuted now. Yes. What we usually say is that the benefit of youth apprenticeship is that it happens towards the end of high school, particularly often in the senior year of a student's high school career, where they either might be trying to fill time in their schedule anyway, and our hope is that this would offer them an opportunity to really either get a head start on gaining some college courses and credit, or put them out on the work site and get them some on-the-job training. And while I would say that while it certainly is not easy for students in the sense that it is a time commitment and there are sacrifices that they have to make, students often are still able to fully experience the time at their school and participate in extracurriculars as they can. And Taylor, if you want to talk about the curriculum aspect of it, I'm happy to let you answer that one.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just say quickly, the strongest programs really don't, they don't change what's required of high school students, right? I mean, where these programs have been really successful, students have some flexibility in their electives, certainly, but also they make good use of well-designed and well-articulated high school CTE. And so students might earn like fulfill requirements while they're through dual enrollment, for example, through CTE dual enrollment. So they can do a couple of high school-based CTE courses, and then as they move through that structured pathway, be earning post-secondary credit, earning the post-secondary credit that they can take with them towards a degree, but the high schools are then recognizing it as either elective credit or credit towards math requirements, depending on the sort of occupational focus of the apprenticeship. It could be math, it could be a humanities requirement, it could be a science and technology requirement. We've even seen some students use coding as a foreign language requirement. Now, people are very divided on whether that makes sense or not. I don't necessarily endorse that. I don't really know what I think about that, but it is one way that students are fulfilling high school graduation requirements through CTE, through CTE courses and dual enrollment as well through youth apprenticeship programs. The idea is not to be layering on whole new courses that students need to be taking to fulfill these opportunities, but to be really thoughtful about the opportunities that are available to students and how they connect in with accessible post-secondary pathways in those communities and in institutions that are accessible to those young people. There's a question here about soft skills and how those are evaluated through these programs. I guess in the interest of moving quickly here, I'll answer that very quickly on the youth apprenticeship side and then kick it over to Martha to see if you have any specific examples or responses that you might give to that concept of soft skills. We typically refer to them as sort of employability skills, and those kinds of things are things like communication, collaboration, teamwork, communication. Those sorts of skills or competencies related to those skills tend to be included in the student's training plan for their on-the-job learning, and then really, really well-designed programs spend time looking across both that on-the-job learning, we call that OTJ, the stuff that happens at the work site, and the classroom component, so that it's very clear across both the classroom learning, the sort of technical training, and the practical training at work, where those skills are embedded, how they're being assessed, and when it's expected that students will be able to demonstrate those sorts of competencies, those skills or competencies independently versus scaffolded with a mentor or with collaborators. So I am going to mute myself, see if Martha has anything else to add on the sort of soft skills component. And I apologize, I realized that was a quick answer to what is a big question, but I know I only have 3 minutes left, so.
I have some thoughts, but not enough detail at this moment. Different groups have developed different measurements, like sort of assessments that can be used at the beginning and at the end of a work-based learning program. The Urban Alliance and a high school internship program has done that. A number of others have. MHA Labs in Chicago has. I think a problem for the field is that there's not enough clarity and consensus on how to measure it and how to teach these skills. I think that is something for the field to grapple with.
All right, we have 1 minute left, and I'm going to just do a rapid 15-second go between my two co-presenters here with me. There's a question about equity and how we ensure equitable access to these programs. If you could give one example of a program or a policy or approach that you think is especially important to ensuring that students have broad access or equitable access to work-based learning or youth apprenticeship, can you name one real quickly while we round robin?
Sure, I can start. We can also drop this in the chat right before we all hop off, but there is a report that was released by some of the folks we are in contact with in North Carolina. And one thing they heavily emphasized as a strategy for equity was making sure that your recruitment, that recruitment is targeted to those underrepresented populations, but two, in that recruitment that you have folks who are representative of those populations, and also that your methods of outreach are methods that are trusted and inclusive of members of that community, whether it's finding folks who are really involved in the local community organizations or the church that are on the ground and know these communities well and deeply.
All right, we are right at 2 o'clock, but Martha, do you have a 15-second answer?
Nope, I don't want to get in the way between these folks and their next session.
Okay, well, I've just dropped the paper that Joyce referenced in the chat. I'll also say we've dropped in some resources that focus on equity from our website, how to ensure equitable access, equitable outcomes. There's a conversation in the chat, a really important one about tracking. And I do think that's a conversation that we really do need to have as we think about these opportunities. There are ways we can certainly expand opportunity rather than narrow them, but it has to be intentional. I want to say thank you to Martha, thank you to Joyce, thank you to Margot and the Aurora Institute who have welcomed us here for this session. And thanks to all of you for joining us. You should feel free to reach out to me anytime. I won't offer that up for Martha and Joyce, but I'll drop my email into the chat momentarily. I would love to hear from you, hear about the work that you're doing and get any feedback. I know that Marco dropped in a feedback for this session into the chat. Please fill that out on your way to your next session and enjoy the next several days. Thanks again to Martha, Joyce, Aurora. Bye to everybody. Stay safe. All right, my co-presenters, it looks like people are falling off and heading to other sessions. I'm going to jump off in case they need this room for something. But Martha, thank you very much for joining us. It's great to get a sneak preview of your work again.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, no, it was great to hear it. And it's a really helpful like setup in some ways to transition to youth apprenticeship. If and when we do it again, we'll have to think who we can splice in between us for a sort of like overview, middle of the road, gold, Cadillac model or whatever it is, because I do think that's helpful for folks to hear the kind of full array of opportunities and it helps contextualize it a little bit. So yeah, thank you for joining us. I hope that Greg and John and Courtney and Lawrence and Whitney are not like, who are these people? Why are they talking now? But hopefully they're just
So I guess we'll sign off.
Yeah, okay. Joyce, I'll talk to you. Look, Greg is listening. He's LOLing us in the chat. But thank you so much for joining us, especially on short notice too. Thanks so much for that. And Joyce, I'll talk to you on Slack in moments.
Thank you, Martha.
Yeah. Bye, everybody who's still listening.